All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to present to you today in Final Cut Pro color correction. We're going to talk about hue, saturation, and brightness. So let's go ahead and get started by sharing screen. I'm going to share my Final Cut Pro screen. Again, in Zoom, remember, we always want to click on the share computer sound and optimize screen share for video clip checkboxes at the bottom in the Zoom setting. So I'm going to double click on Final Cut Pro. And now that I'm in Final Cut Pro, I'll set this off to the side. I will pull my zoom setting screen down to the bottom. I've got my zoom screen with Joseph over on the side, myself on the side, and other folks. Isaac, are you in there? I know you're going to be my sounding board. And we'll take it from there. All right, ladies and gents, here we go. So ask questions as we go along if you need to. My objective is to show you in Final Cut Pro how a clip that you may be familiar with, whether it's the Round and Round clip, whether it's Rob the dance instructor. In fact, we could start with Rob the dance instructor and use this clip as an example of how we can change hue, how we can change saturation, and how we can change brightness. Now, I'll explain along the way why you might want to do that. However, when I look at this picture already, right off the bat, its color, its hue, I'm not sure I want to change because I don't need an overall vibe field change to this. But if I did, I'll explain how I might change that. Additionally, saturation. The colors pop well enough in this shot. But if I wanted them to pop even more so, how I would handle saturation for that. And lastly, overall balance of light, brightness. This picture, this image, does not have a bright window in the background, does not have a dark window in the background. He doesn't have dark features I want to be able to have pull forward in the foreground of his face. Overall, this is a nicely balanced brightness contrast Bezier. This overall balance is good, but how would I alter that? So we're going to cover those three areas right now. So first, you have to identify what clip you want to work with and change. In this case, it's going to be the Rob dialog clip. My playhead is sitting over it so I can see it in my monitor, and it's clicked on and identified down here on my timeline. Now, to change overall color, I need to go to my window box of overall filters. Hold on just a moment. So I'm going to look at within my color settings what options I have. Now recognize that there are already color hues that I could choose. I could choose to colorize my image, giving it an overall change of hue through colorizing the image in a preset. Again, these are all presets. Like this black and white is a preset. Broadcast safe is a preset. And it allows me a preview in my monitor. However, color board, when I click on it as a filter and then grab it and drop it onto the clip, does it then give me the options over here in my settings? Okay. Now remember, I just dropped it onto the Rob dialog clip. I can view my changes here in my canvas. I can look over here at my settings, and I need to see it in a more extreme way. So if I click on this color wheel, it then opens up the board so that I can deal with color, saturation, and exposure. Cole Stanley, remember we said, I have never really heard it called hue before, right? It's actually color. Saturation and desaturation is still the same term. And exposure is just another term for brightness. Okay? Now here's the beauty of the board. Not only does it allow me a master dial for color or saturation, let's start with saturation. It also allows me a shadow. Everything that's dark, I could saturate and make bolder or more mute. Everything that's a mid-tone, I could make bolder or more mute. And if we identify midtones in the image, I would say midtones would be Rob's face, some of these middle colors that aren't dark or bright in his shirt, certainly part of the levelers in the back. If we were to look at highlights, what's bright, and saturate just bright colors, elements in his face, background, and his shirt, you guys, if you look at the overall color balance by pulling just the highlights up, look how it made his skin tone more realistic and pull forward in terms of vibrance of color without making the overall image look like it's bleeding colors. Likewise, if I muted everything that's bright, it keeps all of the midtones and all of the darker tones colors present, but it bleeds everything else. So if I were to do the master dial, that would control all of these dials all together. Everything pulled together forward makes Rob look like he's got a sunburn, makes the blues in the backgrounds look like it's popping, makes his brown shirt pop, makes his colors inside of his undershirt pop forward. It makes it all brighter. But at the sacrifice that I make for making the backgrounds brighter is I make his skin tone not look realistic anymore. So be very careful in the amount that you pull in a master wheel. When I look at a master wheel, I think in terms of how much is just enough to pull forward my main subject's color without differentiating it, making it look like a sunburn. So if I pull it somewhere right in between, overall, my colors become more vibrant, his skin tone remains natural, and overall it looks like in production, I have a very well lit scene. So saturation does that for my overall scene. Let's move on to exposure, which would be your brightness. If in brightness, if I want my lighter colors, again, to be brighter, you could pull that forward. But look what it does. It blows out the tones and definitions and lines in his face. It makes it look like his back has an overall bright light shining on it. It doesn't look so good. But again, if I darken it, and if I go all the way to the bottom, 100% of darkening, it's going to make my entire shot black. So overall, the brightness of the lighter colors, pulling those down, and maybe pulling up my overall dark colors, the dark colors start to look like they're muted, blown out, not colorized well. In fact, the tonation between dark and light has become a neutral. I've taken away all of the color tones, all the brightness tones in between by pulling my darks forward. In fact, it makes it look like the shot was blown out and shot in a silo full of bright lights. Not good. Midtones, it still retains the dark tones and dark colors of brightness, but it blows out, again, a lot of the colors that were there. It brings a lot of brightness to it. Rather, if I were to darken it, I've now created more of a somber, melancholy mood to Rob's view, Rob's look. The overall image feels like it's in a darker nightclub. Like, let's say I was shooting like that. Makes it feel like it's nighttime rather than daytime. Now, bringing these back up, we know that this was shot in good lighting. We know that the lighting balance was shot well as well. Very importantly, if I leave this where it's at in terms of exposure, I don't need to really alter much because it was shot so well during production. Very important that overall it's shot well in production. Joseph, if I'm looking at your picture because it's in my image right now, if I'm looking at your image, that bright light behind you, man, if I were to bring that into Final Cut, if I pulled down that bright light, I would also lose definition of your face and the lines of your face and the smile in your face. Because the production in that shot of you right now is poor. So, this is an overall good balance. We saturated it up in the master dial to pull all the colors forward. Now, what if I wanted to give it a color hue similar to the Matrix? What if I were to pull my master dial into green, giving it a green hue, making all my dark tones more of a green? Dark tones being a green hue, it almost looks like you just color swatched it rather than giving it an overall hue or feel. Same with the brightness. Bringing it to green, makes him look alienish. It's not just digital, it makes it look like aliens overall take over that shot. So whether you bring this to more of a red tone, a brown tone, a yellow tone, and the amount that you bring in, if it's extreme, it's too obvious, it's too blown out. But brought in a subtle way gives it an overall aesthetic and feel where the yellow blends with the overall natural colors that are there. So changing your overall hue changes the overall vibe of the video, of the film, of the aesthetic. Now, what if I wanted to bring this all back to norm and just work in saturations because it was colored so well? Well, you could always desaturate it. If I want to make this a 1940s feel, pull it to black and white. Take your saturation wheel and pull it all the way out. You're still retaining all the tones. You're just bleeding out all the colors. Who has other questions about color correction? Again, myself, I try to shoot my film footage as well as I can to begin with. I typically will go in and pull the overall master dial saturation up just to give it more vibrance. I'll make sure that in my exposure that everything is nicely balanced, and if it is, I don't even move these dials. And that's the most I might do for my color correction. Questions? All right. And that's our color correction demonstration of hue, saturation, and brightness or exposure.